Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
Well, welcome to the Bible 101. I believe this is going to be episode number 9 for us. And today we're finally going to begin reading some stories of the Bible together. We're going to be following along in Eggemeyer's Bible Storybook. I know it's available in a hardback form like this for about $21 at Amazon.com. It is a Bible story book. We're going to particularly concentrate on the stories out of the Old Testament, and we're going to read them as stories to us, as if we were little children, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 or 12 years old, hearing the stories being read to us. I'm going to treat you as my children or my grandchildren, and I hope to read the stories to you that way and make comments like that. For the most part, even though this book was written by a non-Orthodox person, she has done a very, very good job of telling the story for the sake of the story itself, without too much of a theological bias. We will bump into a theological bias occasionally, and we'll have more to say about that a little bit later in this session. But for the most part, we're just going to hear the stories that a child can understand, but not told as a nursery tale. So, we begin then today, episode 9, on page 11, How the World Was Made. Long ago, there was no world at all. There was no sun to shine, no stars to twinkle, no moonbeams to play through the night shadows. But even then, there was God, for He has always been the same unchanging God. Then at the beginning of time, God made the world. At first, water covered everything, and there was darkness everywhere. What a strange and unfriendly place this must have been. But God planned to make it beautiful, so He said, "Let there be light." And He called the light day, and the darkness He called, that's right, night. And this was the first day of time. On the second day, God made the beautiful blue sky and placed in it clouds to carry moisture. And He called the sky heaven. And the third day then, God said, "Let the waters be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And He called the waters the seas, or the oceans, and the dry land He called earth. And the whole earth was bare. There was no grass, no flowers, no trees. So God caused a carpet of grass to grow, and beautiful flowers to spring up from the earth. He made the trees and the plants, and God knew His work was good. But God had more plans for His world. On the fourth day, He made the sun, the moon, and the stars. The sun was to rule the day, be the source of light for the day, and the moon would rule the night, give us light at night. Next, God began to create living creatures. He made all kinds of fish to swim in the seas, and birds of every description to fly in the sky. The fifth day passed, and the world had become a better place. It was on the sixth day that God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures." And living things appeared in the woods, on the plains, in the air, and in the sea. Still, this was a strange world, for there were no people in it. There was not a home anywhere, not a man, a woman, or a child. What a strange world it was. But you see, God had not yet finished creating His wonderful world. He planned to have people live on the earth to enjoy its beauties and to take care of it. They would know who had made all these things, and more than that, they would be able to love and to worship Him. So it was that God made the first man out of the dust of the earth. He made the body, and then He breathed into that body the breath of life, and mankind became a living soul, and man became a living soul. And God called that first man Adam. And Adam was to name all the birds and the animals, and it was his job to rule over all the living creatures. Now, Adam needed a helper, and God said, "It is not good that man should be alone. I will make him a helper." So God made Adam a wife, and Adam loved her deeply, and he called his wife Eve. So what was the first man and woman on the planet? Adam and, that's right, Eve. And when the sixth day had ended, God had made the world and had placed everything in it just as He had planned. And on the seventh day, God rested then. And we come to then on page 12. Please forgive me, my voice is a little weak. I was off and we had to retape some of these sessions because I've had COVID. And a lasting, lingering effect of it has been a dry tickle in my throat that seems to come and go. When we come now to the next little story, the first home, I need to stop just a second. Now, this will probably be the only time I really have to do this as we make our way through this book together. I'm talking to you now as adults. I need to talk about how we read the Bible, and especially how we understand this story right here. You see, it is here in the story we are about to read and tell that the difference between Eastern Christianity and Western Christianity will take place. The author here, Miss Eggemeyer, has done a really good job being neutral in her book, just telling the story, except you see, she comes and lives in the West. She's only known Western Christianity, and so when she tells this story, she tells it the way she was taught the meaning of the story, and the way the meaning of the story has been taught ever since the Western Church broke away from the original Christianity back in 1054, and actually starting earlier than that, as long ago as 1600 years ago in 400 AD. So I'm going to read it with some corrections in it, and then when I stop, before we go to the next story, I want to then talk about why I made the changes, so I can show you the difference between East and West that makes the difference of how we got two different versions of Christianity here in the United States. Adam and Eve were happy in their paradise home. Our English translation garden, but the original word in the Septuagint is paradise. Paradise. Nowhere in the English language Protestant Old Testament, or a Catholic Bible for that matter, do you find the word paradise in the Old Testament. It's actually found 26 times in the Old Testament, and not one time is it translated paradise into English. Of the 26 times the word paradise is found in the Old Testament, 13 of them, that's half of them, 13 times the word paradise will be found in chapter 3 of Genesis. Paradise. Now in the New Testament, the word paradise is used, same Greek word, and in the New Testament, instead of translating it, we just write the Greek into our alphabet, and it says paradise. And so it's found 3 times in the New Testament. And those times refer to, if you will, especially when you read the reference in the book of Revelation, refer back to Genesis chapter 3. Well, that's completely lost to us in a Protestant Bible, in an English Bible. So I'm going to insert the word paradise, the original word, every time she uses the word garden as I tell the story. Adam and Eve were happy in their paradise home. God had given them good things to enjoy, and they knew nothing about evil and wrongdoing. God walked and talked with them in the cool of the evenings. In this paradise, God planted a wonderful tree called the tree of life. Whoever ate of the fruit of this tree would live forever. They would have life. Another tree was called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God said, now you may eat of every tree in paradise except from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. If you eat of this tree, it'll hurt you. It'll cause you to die. So don't eat from that tree. But from all the other trees, you can eat. One day, Eve was in paradise, and the serpent came to her. Hey, does God let you and Adam eat of every tree here in paradise? She said, no, we can eat of every one except one. There's one we cannot eat from. God told us not to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, because it'll hurt us and we'll die. The serpent laughed. Oh, my dear. No. You're not going to die if you eat from that tree here in paradise. You see, God knows that if you ever eat from that tree, you'll become just like Him. You'll become as wise as Him. And He just doesn't want you to get as good as He is. So you can't eat from that tree because God doesn't want you to become like Him. That's why He told you not to eat from it. Well, now, Eve looked at the fruit even closer now. It really would. If it will make me like God, that's surely got to be a good thing. So I think I'll eat from it and it'll help me become like God. So she reached out and grabbed that fruit from the tree and pulled it off. And she took a bite of it just when Adam came walking up to her, and she went, "Here," and held some out as she smiled, and it was so good you could see that taste on her face. That just, she was, this tastes good. And so Adam took a bite too. Now, at once, Adam and Eve knew something was wrong. Now, you'll notice at this point, she says, the translator, Eggemeyer, says, they disobeyed. We're going to get to that later, so let me change the word now, not to disobedience. They knew the minute they ate from it, something was different. Something began happening inside them that was changing them. They knew something was different. And maybe fear filled their hearts. Maybe they were suddenly afraid. What have we done? What is this? What's happened? She says that now they were afraid to see God. I don't know if they were so much afraid as they were ashamed. You know, sometimes when you do something that you know wasn't good for you, and you did it anyway, maybe I've asked you not to play with your ball here in the house, to bounce it, and maybe you bounced the ball. And when you did, maybe you lost control, and it hit the picture frame over there, and it broke the glass. Remember that, when that happened? What were you going to do? You knew the minute I came in or Mom came in, we were going to notice at some point the glass was broken. It's that being ashamed. Oh no, I can't hide it. I'm going to get caught. You're going to know I was bouncing my ball in here. And the very thing that you said might happen, could happen, did. And I'm now embarrassed about it. And so they were ashamed. They didn't want God to catch them. And pretty soon, you know, God would come in the late evening, late day, early evening, when it had cooled off, and would chat with them, and they heard Him coming. Adam, where are you? Well, of course, God knows everything, so God knew where Adam was. He knew what they had done, but He wants to find them and to reassure them. And so He comes, Adam, where are you? And finally they come out of hiding. They were hiding in the bushes that were there. And Adam said, I heard your voice, and I was afraid, so I hid. Now, he was afraid, you see. And it was that afraid that comes from being ashamed. Why should you be afraid to see me? God said. Did you eat of that tree? Did you touch that tree like I told you you shouldn't? It would hurt you? And Adam said, Eve gave me some of it to eat, and I ate it. So then God looks to Eve and says, what is this that you've done? And Eve said, the serpent told me it was a good thing, and so I ate it. Now, she says God's heart was full of pain and sorrow. It's a very, very scary thing to push a human emotion and to try to make God as a super parent. God was aware that Satan had done the damage and that Adam and Eve were the victims. God was aware that He had created Adam and Eve with a plan, and He was aware that the serpent was trying to fight God by tricking Adam and Eve into hurting themselves and by therefore messing up God's plan. But you see, God is not subject to the serpent. We can mess up, and we can delay or mess up what God plans in our lives, but the serpent can never block the plan of God being achieved. And so God is now going to tell them that because they had tasted of the tree of death, don't eat that tree, because when you do, you'll die. I remember when I was maybe 13 or 14 years old, once I was a child like you, and I would mow my neighbor's yard for a little bit of money. And I had been in the Boy Scouts, so I had seen pictures of poison ivy. And I knew that if you got it on you, it could cause your hands to burn and sting, and it was uncomfortable. But as I was mowing my neighbor's yard, over near the water faucet on the outside of his house, I noticed a single green plant growing, and I thought, that looks like poison ivy. If it is, I need to get rid of it so the owner of the house won't get poison ivy on them. But I didn't follow my own advice. Rather than getting clippers or putting gloves on, I went over and grabbed that vine and yanked it out, tossed it on the ground, and then I ran my lawnmower over it. Well, it was maybe in July. It was hot. My hands were sweaty. And that poison ivy got into the sweat, got into the pores on my hands. And when I wiped the sweat off my face, the poison ivy on my wet hands got on this wet. And by the time I finished mowing my neighbor's yard, and I went home to take a bath and I was beginning to itch all over. And it took, I don't know, a week or so of covering myself with some kind of pink lotion. Calamine, I think, might have been the name of it. And the only time I didn't itch was when I was in the bathtub with only my head showing up above the water. Because the minute air would touch me, I was miserable. I will never, ever forget that there are some things that if you touch them, they'll hurt you. Now, it didn't make me die, but it made me almost wish I was dead. I was hurting so bad. It was just a horrible experience of being covered with poison ivy almost all over my body. And so my parents were sad that I was hurting, but there was nothing they could do to make it go away. There was nothing but to keep putting calamine lotion on me and letting it run its course till I finally got better. You see, my parents were not angry with me. They hurt because I hurt. My parents did not spank me because I had not followed the warning that was poison ivy. I had disobeyed being smart and had done something that was stupid. I'd grabbed a hold of poison ivy. You see, a warning is a good thing. It keeps us out of trouble. Don't touch poison ivy is a good thing. It keeps us from hurting ourselves. It doesn't hurt our parents, and they are not spanking us. The hurt is inbuilt in touching the poison ivy, eating of that tree in the first place. In the case of Adam and Eve, it introduced death to them. It caused them at that moment to feel death, a foreigner, a foreign feeling at work in them. At some point, their eyesight began to die. They could no longer see God, couldn't see the angels, and they began to grow hard of hearing. They couldn't hear God. They still could this day. But as time passed, day by day, they could no longer hear the angels singing. And so it was as if they couldn't see and they couldn't hear, and paradise began to slip away from them. Now, the way the story is told, of course, is that they lost paradise, which is what happened to them. They had the world they were now living in, had trees, had dirt, had grass, had birds, had bees, had fish, had the animals, but they could no longer see and hear the invisible presence of God and the things of God that surrounded them. They couldn't live there any longer. And so they had to leave. They lost it, as it were. It was like when I had that poison ivy, I could have lived in the bathtub, as it were, because I couldn't live out of it any longer. It hurt too much. And in this case, they couldn't see and hear. My grandkids know what it is for their grandfather to not be able to hear as good as he once did. And so there's all kinds of sounds they get to hear that I don't hear at all. And sometimes when they come to ask me something, they speak in the very soft voice, and I have to ask them to speak louder. So you see, there's a whole world going on around me and my loss of some hearing. That means there's a whole world of things being said that's happening that I'm totally unaware of. And so the world I'm living in, now with some loss of hearing, it's the same world you're living in, only it isn't. I've lost living in your world and the world of sound and hearing everything, to now living in a world that's much smaller. I don't hear it all, so I don't know if that helps understand what we're saying here or not. And so Adam and Eve now were living, instead of living in paradise, the world they lived in was a world where everything was dying. They were beginning to die. Things around them were now beginning to die. And so paradise, a world of life, and access to that tree of life was now not available. They couldn't see the tree of life any longer. Where was it? It hadn't moved, but they couldn't see it. They no longer had access to it. And so they began living in this world of death. And as the years then passed, Adam and Eve had children, and they had grandchildren, and they remembered the promise that God had made to them, that a day would come that someone born of a woman, someone born from the woman's seed, from Eve, would smash the serpent. And the purposes of God that God had for His creation all along would be accomplished, made possible, and the serpent would be conquered once and for all. Well, let me go on to the first children, and then we'll do a little background commenting here. Because Adam and Eve had tasted death, they had to find another place to live. Where they lived was now another place. It was not the paradise. The paradise they had lived in, poof, seemed gone because they couldn't see it or hear it. Adam had to work hard now. He had to work long hours to get food because death was at work. Plants could die, food would die. His hands would blister, they would get cut. Life had changed, and hardness and difficulty had come when they were no longer in paradise. Eve also had difficulties, had health issues, reared the children, had to find ways to take care of everyone. So life had changed, and life was no longer the paradise they once had known. Adam and Eve could no longer walk with God in the cool of the evening. They couldn't see Him. They couldn't talk with God in the cool of the evening because they couldn't hear Him. So what they did was they would build an altar where they could worship God, and they could then have a silent conversation, if you will, one-sided, believing and trusting that God was somehow present, even though they could no longer see Him, and even though He was no longer they could no longer hear him. They wanted him to know they still believed in him, and they were sorry that they had messed up, and as best they could, they continued to believe in him and to talk with him. Adam and Eve must have been lonely with no other people to talk to. But God planned that there would be more people. So a baby boy was born to Adam and Eve. They named him Cain. How they must have loved him. And later God gave them another little boy, and they named him Abel. When Cain and his brother Abel grew old enough to understand, Adam and Eve told them about the great God who had created everything. They told him how they had messed up, made a mistake, and had told them the same way that God had instructed them, that there were certain things that were now dangerous and would in fact hurt them and could harm them greatly, because they now lived in a world of death, where death was possible, because they had tasted of it. One day, Cain and Abel were out in a field, and they each built an altar. They've now grown up as young men and are beginning to worship God themselves. Abel raised sheep, and so he brought a young lamb as his sacrifice. Cain was a farmer, and he planted crops, and so he brought some of his crop to put on the altar as his gift to God. We don't know what the difference was. We don't know if it was something in Cain's life, something in Cain's heart. Maybe he was just going through the motions. I don't really believe there's a God. I don't really believe. Who is this invisible one? And I don't know why you putting a lamb over there, a perfectly good lamb that could grow up and could feed us, why killing it on the altar, or why me plucking up these plants and laying them here. I'm doing it because I guess Mom and Dad said we ought to do it, but I don't get it. I don't know, but for whatever reason, somehow Cain knew that his offering wasn't acceptable. That somehow he knew God didn't like it. And at the same time, he knew that what Abel had done, God did like. Now, we don't know whether it was God liked lamb better than okra or better than lentils. We don't know. Wheat. But for whatever reason, Cain got angry at Abel because Abel was somehow doing it right, doing something right. And so in his anger, Cain is going to pick up a stick or a rock, and he's going to hit Abel, push him down, and Abel hit his head. Somehow he hits Abel, and Abel dies. Now, this is why I look at you so many times and say, don't wrestle, don't run, don't do that, you'll get hurt. You're going to hurt somebody else. Cain hit him, and something else happened. Abel died. Now, God does a strange thing at this moment. He doesn't get with Cain. He doesn't punish Cain. He knows that Cain is simply acting, behaving in a way of death, that's the world he's now living in. It's not just that the world made him do it, but there's some compassion with our God. Cain is going to leave, but God puts a special mark on him. We don't know what that mark was, but it was a mark that protected him and kept people from killing him. Maybe Cain was just such a quarrelsome person that he just made everybody mad, or he was mad at the world. I don't know. We don't know. But God put a mark on him to keep anyone from hurting him, because that's who God is, a compassionate God. Now, when God had come to Cain, before he put the mark on him, he came and he said, "Where's your brother? I'm looking for Abel. Where's Abel?" And Cain said a very famous line, "Am I my brother's keeper? I don't know. I'm taking care of him?" And it almost implies, doesn't it? It almost means or tells us that in some way we are to be taking care of one another. And especially here in our home, we take care of each other, and we don't beat up each other, and we don't leave the house and get on the playground at school and insult our brother or mock him or our sister and make fun of them. We take care of one another. Well, that's a pretty good stopping place in our story, so we're going to stop right there. And we will pick up our story then next time with the great flood. Now, what I would like to do in the time that we have left is talk about Genesis and how it is understood. So now I'm talking adult to adult, and I want to begin with Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. We read the story of how God created the planets, the earth. On the sixth day, he then created all the living things, animals, and finished by creating us, mankind. And Genesis 1:26. Let us make man in our image and likeness. Let us make man in our image and likeness. And he shall have rule over the animals, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And in 1:27, he'll have the rule over the animals, all of that. And so God created him, them, in his image. In the image of God created he him. Let us make man in our own image, and in the image and likeness and in his image he made them, us. Now, the original Christianity, the original church, understood these two verses to mean this: that image and likeness are two different things. Image is who we are or what we are. Likeness was how we behave. Do we behave like we are? For example, there is a difference between a sparrow and an eagle. Now, they are both birds, but they do not behave the same way. There is a difference between a dog and a cat. They do not look alike, nor do they behave in a similar way. Dogs behave like dogs, and regardless of what species of dog you have, they all share a characteristic of acting like a dog. And they act like the particular species that they happen to be inside of being a dog. They have an image, a boxer dog, and a likeness. They behave like a boxer dog. They don't behave like a Chihuahua. Therefore, when we read verse 27, it says, "And God created them in His image," that God did not create us with the likeness. The fathers of the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th centuries, in commenting on this, say that Adam and Eve were made in the image. I better move this out of the way so you can see it if I get too low. And plus free will. We were created with the image of God, an identity of who we are, and then we were given free will so that with our free will we would choose to begin to behave like God, like the image within us. That Adam and Eve were to walk with God in the cool of the evening and begin to use their free will to become more and more like the image, like God. And so they were not created with the likeness. They had free will to choose to begin acquiring and becoming like the image that they are. Boxers behave like the image, the identity of being a boxer. Chihuahuas behave like a Chihuahua, etc. All of creation behaves like its identity. All of creation behaves. It is a harmonious creation. All creation behaves like it was created to behave. All except us. We ate of that fruit of death, that fruit that says, I've got free will, it's my life, I want to do with it what I want to do with it. I want to become like whoever my heroes are, whose ever name on my jersey I want to wear, whose sports figure I want to emulate. I want my own Hollywood idol to be like. I want to be who I want to be like. I don't want to have to be or choose to be like the image of God. And so we're the only species of all creation that does not have likeness inbuilt, and we're the only species that chooses not to be like the image that we are created in to become. Now, beginning around 400 AD, 400 years later, after Christ, after the Roman Empire has been converted to Christianity, Augustine, writing in Latin, will begin to use the term original sin. And by original sin, he is going to say that 127, and we were created in his image, even though it doesn't say likeness. Augustine says it's implied. Implied. So that Adam and Eve were created a finished product, just like all of creation is a finished product. Now, let me ask you a question. Remember when the serpent came to Eve? Why did he say, well, what did he say would happen if she ate from the tree? That's right. She would become like God. And God didn't want her doing that, right? That's what Satan said, and because that's what Satan said, it sounded tempting. Oh, this will do something that I don't already have. I can become like God this way, instantaneously. Now, let me ask you, in the West with Augustine, he says Adam and Eve already had the likeness. If Adam and Eve already had the likeness, then the tempter, the serpent, could not tempt Eve by saying, if you do this, you'll get it. You can't eat that fruit and get like God because you're already like God. Why do you need the fruit? But Satan comes and says, if you eat of this, you'll get likeness. If Augustine and the West is correct, then the tempter, the serpent, what he offered was a lie. Got it? You're offering me something I don't have that makes me want it. It's called advertising on television. If I'll just buy this product, I can eat anything I want and I'll still lose weight. Well, where do I get it? If I do this product and I only use it every other day for 5 minutes, I not only will lose weight, but I'll have a perfect body and a six-pack of abs. I think that's what they call them. Well, where do I get the machine? Advertising works because you promise me something I don't have, and you promise it will happen instantaneously. That's also the trick. Something I don't have, and something that's going to be painless and quickly given to me. The results. That's what the tempter tempted Eve with. Something she didn't have, and something that would be instantaneously given to her. Augustine says, no, we got it all. And here's what happens with Augustine. Augustine creates a system. He says Adam and Eve had the image and they had the likeness. They were completed and done. And when they ate of the fruit, Augustine is going to tell the story, is going to read the story as a lawyer and look at it as a legal issue. Legal. He's going to say that God is a lawgiver. He gives a law, a rule to Adam and Eve. Don't you dare eat of that tree. And Adam and Eve ate of it, and now God, in a legal system, is got to punish them, find they are guilty of breaking the rule, and they are now going to be punished, not just by losing eyesight and hearing and seeing the kingdom of God, not just for losing paradise. They're going to be punished by now going and spending eternity in hell. And so you have God pictured as an autocratic emperor of an empire that is going to punish his people for breaking his imperial laws, and is going to cast everyone breaking the imperial fire laws into a massive pit of fire. And as the West takes this view, this legal understanding is known as original sin. And it goes on, this view, that this legal view of sin, what Adam and Eve did, was so humongous, so horrendous, so outlandish, so unforgivable, that therefore everyone, not only Adam and Eve, are guilty, but their children are guilty before they are born. In Eve's womb, Cain and Abel are guilty for what their parents did of eating from that tree. They have inherited original sin. And their children will inherit original sin. And everyone on the planet then, every human being born guilty of original sin and is going to hell when we die. That's the human condition according to the West, whether it's Catholic or Protestant. that because of original sin, everyone is going to hell. And that's why we need a Savior, someone who will save us from hell. That is Western Christianity that is being lived and taught ever since 400 AD. Original sin. Now, when Martin Luther and John Calvin broke with the Catholic Church, they broke in favor of Augustine. And they are going to take Augustine and try to reinforce him and protect him from being abused by the Catholic Church, and how they offered forgiveness for the original sin. And this viewpoint of Calvin and Luther started his own church to practice it. Calvin instead created a theology that became the foundation of the Presbyterian Church in Scotland. Through the Puritans would begin to implement it in the Anglican Church. The Church of England would bring it into Methodism that was created here in the United States. And out of the Puritanism, and then on the frontier, you get eventually evangelical Christianity, the Baptist and other denominations here in the United States. And so you get to the evangelical movement today. Now, not every one of these groups, not every congregation or every parish would believe all of it. There were some that didn't believe any of it, and they would be the liberals inside their group. They'd be the liberals inside the Methodists, or they'd be the liberals inside the evangelicals. But those who believed, which was the majority of people in the United States since the Great Awakening, and you had Jonathan Edwards' famous sermon, "Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God." This angry God that's now going to punish all of us. Let me hurry. I know we're out of time. We had Calvin. And Calvinism, his theology that undergirds Western Protestantism, is known as TULIP. Let's do it this, U-L-I-P. TULIP stands for total depravity, that 100% of our species is damned and going to hell at birth. We are totally depraved. There's no one that's any good. Total depravity. Not only are we 100% as a species, every one of us depraved, but every single one of us inside of ourselves is 100% wicked. So it's 100% of 100% of us. There's absolutely nothing of any decency in every one of us as we are born. TULIP. Total depravity. However, God wants the world to know that He's not just a mean God, but He's a loving God. And so He wants to save some of us just so He can demonstrate that He does have love and a gentle spirit in Him. And so He's wants to save some of us. And it's totally it has nothing to do with us. It doesn't mean that if He picks me, I somehow had any decency in me. No. He gets all the credit. It's just because out of His pure love, He's decided, like Caesar, not to put the thumb down and let me die. He's decided, I think we'll let you go up. What should I do? Close my eyes and up, down, up, down, up, down, up. Okay, you up. You can be saved. Unmerited. Well, why didn't He just save all of us? You can't take advantage of God's love. If you do that, then you've done away with His wrath. and his righteous anger against us. So therefore it is a limited atonement, a limited salvation. He's only going to save a few, known as the elect, known as the predestined, whatever you want to call it. There's only a few that are ever going to get picked. Aren't you one of the loved ones, favorite ones, if you got picked? If I thought I was picked, you had to be walking around, I got picked. You automatically are arrogant because you think you got picked, one of the picked ones. Wow. Well, what if you don't want picked? I don't want to get picked. I like living my life the way it is. I'll have a beer here or there and maybe wink at a girl. I don't know. I like it. Tough. There's no free will with God. If he picks you, you're picked. And once picked, always picked. I heard that bumper sticker, didn't it? Oh, it said once saved, always saved. You have no choice. God picked you and you're picked. And so it's irresistible grace. Irresistible. Okay, so now I got picked and I've been living the straight and narrow for 30 years. I'm ready to retire. I surely really would like one more beer. It's been 30 years since I had one. That would be mighty tempting. Sorry. There's no retiring. There's no retirement. You can't have any. And even if you do, it doesn't get you out because of the perseverance of the saints. Perseverance. Tulip. Total depravity. Unmerited grace on God's part. Limited atonement. Irresistible grace. You got to accept it. And you can't get out of it. Once saved, always saved type of Christianity. Well, you say, wait a minute. Out here you get to choose and walk an aisle. Well, you see, once we had democracy in this country and you had frontier religion, if you got to vote for who the sheriff was or who the dog catcher was, now we've got to say you get to vote for who God is. And so we in America democratized John Calvin. And instead of God being this autocratic dictator of the universe, and so that it's irresistible and you get picked, now it's democracy says you get to walk the aisle, say the sinner's prayer, you get to be baptized, whatever was offered as the remedy, whether the sinner's prayer or baptism in a sacramental church. If you do what's recommended, your choice, you get to come, you do it, and then you can't get out of it. You have the perseverance of the saints. So the only thing that got changed in American Christianity was now we have a choice, which is evangelical, evangelism, etc., that begins to happen. And so if you have this position, when you read the story of Adam and Eve, you talk about disobedience. They disobeyed God, ate of the fruit. They deserve punishment. He kicks them out of an earthly paradise home, and now they're going to wander the earth, and he's going to just let them die and go to hell, etc., etc., etc. And eventually, you get to the New Testament, and God will send His Son to be a victim, to die in our place, so that we then can get to go to heaven and not die in hell, because somehow God took our place. That's Western Christianity. I'm not attacking you if that's what you have been raised in and believe in. But that is not the original gospel of the church. And as we read through, there aren't many places I have to say, oops, wait a minute, but except right here at the beginning. And you see, that's where the division happens. It's just so little bitty, one little bitty verse, one word, likeness. Do we have it or don't we? If we have it, then we don't need to eat the fruit. We've already got it. I don't know why we were offered it, but we misused it, disobeyed to eat, and it's disobedience is the issue. If we don't have it, then it's our free will, and with our free will we've done something that brought harm to us. God's not angry at us. He is the only lover of mankind, and in His loving kindness He sends salvation to us, etc. It's a different story, a different gospel being lived depending on what you do with Genesis 1:26 and Genesis 1:27. So our approach is going to be to read the stories of the Bible and understand them from the perspective that we have been created with the image, and with our free will we have the freedom to choose to become like the image of God within us. Well, we went a little longer than we're normal today, so God bless you for being part of us. And next week when we come back, we'll pick up the story there. I think it's the story of the great flood. So I'll see you next week. Thanks. See you then.
Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit. Praise the Lord, O my soul. I will praise the Lord as long as I live. I will sing praises to my God while I have peace.